Hi, everybody. Ralph here with The Pluralist, Part 4, The Dilemma of Modern Democracy. Before I get to that, though, a personal note. Mariana and I went to Portland, Tennessee last evening for a Music on Main concert by our friends Adam and Amy Pope. We hadn't seen them for a little over a year or so we had an opportunity to go watch them perform last night in Portland, Tennessee. Brilliant, as always. If you haven't seen them, you got to make it a special trip to do that sometime. But at the beginning of their concert, the mayor of Portland came out and said a prayer, and he included the people of Lahaina on Maui in Hawaii in his prayer. Lahaina, the city of Lahaina, has been completely destroyed. It has been burned to the ground with very, very few exceptions by a wildfire that looked like a torch, according to the firemen trying to find it and the people trying to flee it, literally racing to stay ahead of the fire and get out of the way of the fire. Dozens of them did not and are killed, but everything in the city is destroyed. And I just found out this morning that Lahaina is almost exactly the same size population-wise as Portland, Tennessee. So if you can imagine, as horrific as it is to imagine, Portland, Tennessee being burned to the ground by a wildfire as the people flee, I can't imagine anything more horrific than that. So prayers to the people of Lahaina, and we hope those who did make it out safely can somehow forget this horror somehow. Anyway, that's a rough start to the Pluralist Part 4, The Dilemma of Modern Democracy. That is the title of an essay. It was written by Carl Becker, an American historian who studied the American Revolution and the Age of Enlightenment in America and Europe, and he wrote this essay in 1941. I'll start with a quote from the essay. Quote, "It is obvious that the problem is intrinsically an economic one. That is, the dilemma of modern democracy." And with that, he begins to explain that the dilemma of modern democracy is to find a tolerable distribution of the massive wealth created by capitalism. If we can't do that, there will eventually be a revolution, followed by a dictatorship, or so the theory goes, and there are lots of examples around the world of exactly that thing happening. Becker starts by talking about the push in his day to adopt social insurance programs to seek an acceptable distribution of the wealth of our nation. Remember, 1941 was just 1 year after the Social Security benefits were started to be paid out, and long before most of the dozens of income redistribution programs in the U.S. today. Becker, this mass of what we call social legislation has been brought about by the assumption that the system of laissez-faire, of free business enterprise, so eminently successful in stimulating the production of wealth, is incapable, without government regulation, of bringing about an equitable or even a tolerable distribution of it. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal codified his conviction that unregulated free enterprise was incapable of distributing the wealth it produces in a way that a democratic society will tolerate. Which brings up the next interesting question posed by Becker. Inevitably, therefore, the question becomes, can the problem of the production and distribution of wealth be solved by any amount of government regulation? In other words, can a democratic republic, even with government regulations and social programs, sufficiently distribute the massive wealth created by capitalism to avoid a revolution and eventual dictatorship? Becker, the communists say no. Sooner or later, the revolution. The fascists say no. The totalitarian state is the only solution. So, I guess we just give up, right? No. But the communists and the fascists are not, nor were they even the first doubters. Those who gave us this republic to protect had doubts that we could avoid a populist revolution and its outcome, dictatorship. I used this to end part 3 on Monday, so if you only saw the Friday version, you missed it. In an essay published in the Wall Street Journal, Jeffrey Rosen, president and CEO of the National Constitution Center, writes, and I quote, "At the end of their lives, Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, who had reconciled, were pessimistic about the future of the American experiment. Adams worried that American citizens lacked sufficient civic virtue to sustain the republic, and Jefferson feared that factional clashes over slavery would destroy the Union." Of course, it almost did about 80 years later. Still quoting, "Among the founding generations, only James Madison was moderately optimistic that American institutions would survive. He hoped that public opinion could be educated to overcome the most destructive partisan passions. He had faith that, among other things, a class of enlightened literati would use the new technologies of the print media to spread the cool voices of reason throughout the land." Well, we know how that's turned out so far. Is the media using all of its new technologies, spreading the cool voice of reason throughout our nation? Or is it doing just the opposite? I didn't have to read Madison's quote or Becker's essay to conclude that it's going to take a lot of help from the media to steer this democratic republic to safe waters. The media impacts public opinion, and public opinion determines the strength or vulnerability of our democratic republic. So I would again urge the media, including talk radio, as I did in part 3, to lighten up on the business model of selling heat and let in a little, or maybe a lot, more light. The moderate optimism expressed by both Becker, the 1941 historian, and Madison, the author of our Constitution, rests mostly on the shoulders of intelligent statesmen aided by cool-headed media to produce an educated, civic-minded population and prevent a grievance-based revolution that would replace our democratic republic with a dictatorship. Today, we have too few of each, statesmen and cool-headed media. In this chicken and egg scenario, I believe the media must come first. The people won't elect intelligent statesmen unless the population is educated on public affairs by a more cool-headed, intelligent, honest media. It is a testament to past generations that the U.S. has not only survived this long, but we are still considered, by most anyway, the leading world example of a strong, rich, free, pluralist society. It is also a fact that we have added scores of new social insurance programs, income redistribution programs, since Becker wrote his essay in 1941. 2/3 of our budget is now income redistribution in one form or another. And the population is saturated with much, much more media than in Madison's or Becker's days. And yet democracy today feels more vulnerable than any time that I can remember, and I'm 73 years old. So to Becker's original question, can the problem of the production and distribution of wealth be solved by any amount of government regulation? My conclusion has to be that it cannot. But I'm sure others would argue that we just don't have enough income redistribution yet. I believe we need a new political model, a pluralist model, not an us versus them model, but an us and them model. Not either our way or their way, but a way that is good and fair to everyone, a way that produces benefits for all, along with more goodwill and better friendships. Basically, the rotary four-way test way. And I have admitted in the past, previous talks, that what I'm describing may be one of, if not the most difficult task in the world. In fact, it may be impossible. A lot of people think it isn't. Think it is. But Americans routinely do things that seem impossible to me when they are determined to do so. But even with determination, it takes uniquely talented or brilliant people to do those things. Today, I think we lack both the talent and the determination among our representatives in Congress and in the White House. Too many of the people in elected office are not even interested in seeking solutions that are good for everyone. They're only interested in defeating the goals of the opposing party and scoring victories that will get them reelected. That's the easy route for politicians, but it's a disastrous route for our country. And we can't keep going in that route. Becker, democratic government works best when the minority can meet defeat at the polls in good temper. When these conditions no longer obtain, the democratic way of life is always in danger. Are losers meeting defeat with good temper today? The answer is actually mixed. I would say that most losing candidates do meet defeat in good temper and with grace, with one, maybe a couple, glaring exceptions. Most grievance groups do not. Becker, in closing, insisted he was not predicting a revolution followed by dictatorship, despite his compelling warning to the contrary. Quote, I did not say this will happen. I do not think it will, but it is futile to suppose it cannot happen. Futile to rely upon the saving grace of some transcendent power to bring us to a predestined good end. The only available purposes are our own, the only available intelligence, such intelligence as we can command. James Madison gave us a constitution. It still stands as the prime example today of how you can have a democratic republic if it's possible. The least the media can do, in my opinion, is to in return for Madison giving us that Constitution, is to answer his call for a class of enlightened literati to use the new technologies to spread the cool voice of reason throughout the land. The duty for we the people is to prove Adams wrong in his fear that we lack the civic virtue to avoid slouching into a revolution and dictatorship. That's all for now. I'll be posting this video on my wall just as soon as I say goodbye, and I'll post it on YouTube and Twitter before the end of the day. Thanks for watching. I'm Ralph Bristol, the Pluralist.